Hey guys, Derek and
Paula here.
from Back to Reality.
Welcome back to our garden.
So today we're going to take advantage of all the nice warm spring weather and start building another garden out on our little homestead. But unlike all of the other permaculture experiments we've been up to, this one doesn't contain any hay whatsoever. Instead, this one's all about the wood chips.
Yep.
So stick around.
Wood chips.
As I mentioned, we've been experimenting with different forms of permaculture, and today we're going to try another popular method commonly known as Back to Eden. Now, I'm not going to go into quite as much detail about this method as I have for some of the others, but it's not because it's any less interesting or any less important. On the contrary, we're actually quite excited about this particular experiment. From what we've read, it tends to be very successful. However, despite all of the hype, it's really not all that much different from any other form of sheet mulching, such as the Ruth Stout method. The only thing that truly sets Back to Eden apart is the fact that it happens to suggest specifically using wood chips rather than any other type of organic matter, such as hay. Plus, the Back to Eden method has already been covered quite thoroughly by none other than the man who invented it, in an interesting documentary of the same name, Back to Eden. But since trying to explain stuff is kind of my thing, I'll still give you a brief overview while also encouraging you to go directly to the source. So as I said, Back to Eden is really just a variation on sheet mulching, which in its most basic form is literally just covering the ground with a layer or sheet of organic matter or mulch. Absolutely any organic matter will do, such as hay, straw, leaves, needles, or of course wood chips. Now, in order to explain why sheet mulching is such a great way to build rich, fertile soil, I think it makes sense for us to first talk about the exact polar opposite, deserts. Stay with me on this. What causes desertification? Well, of course, there are a number of factors that can contribute to the creation of such dry and barren landscape. Drought and climate change come to mind pretty quickly. But one of the primary causes is actually man-made deforestation. You see, when we strip the land of its natural cover, we end up leaving it susceptible to erosion, evaporation, and eventually, wind. And while these natural forces may not sound like much, I think a quick look at our planet as a whole should serve as an adequate reminder of just how serious they can be. And that's why nature is so quick to fill any exposed topsoil with a plethora of weeds. Their roots soak up water to combat erosion. Their leaves shade the soil from the hot summer sun to prevent evaporation. And with all of these plants in place, the wind does little more than assist with the distribution of pollen and seeds. So when we see a typical tilled garden with large sections of exposed topsoil, we need to remember that what we're really seeing is the first stage of a future small desert. That's why weeds are such a problem for traditional gardens, because nature is desperately trying to maintain its fertility. But unfortunately, the well-intentioned gardener unknowingly fights it at every turn by plucking the weeds as quickly as they can sprout. So with all the exposed soil and constant weeding, you may be wondering why a traditional tilled garden doesn't immediately become a sandbox. Well, it's because the gardener constantly toils to add water, fertilizer, compost, and manure. They dig up the soil every spring and fall in order to aerate it and add amendments. They spend their blood, sweat, tears, and dollars every day just to maintain what nature does, well, naturally. Okay, so you don't want a garden filled with weeds. I get that. But luckily, living vegetation isn't the only way that nature prevents desertification. It also quite happily uses dead vegetation. For instance, take a look at our field. It's just coming out of winter dormancy, and what do you notice all around me? Dead grass, dead leaves, and dead wildflowers. It's nature's mulch! And if we take a closer look, we can see that there's all of these new plants naturally sprouting up through it. Just like over here, in our garlic bed. But while a layer of mulch helps to prevent evaporation and the loss of nutrients, it also just happens to add more nutrients over time as it begins to compost. So if you only remember one thing about this video, let it be this. Mulch builds soil, and exposed earth builds deserts. Got it? Good. Let's get back to the wood chips. So, like the Ruth Stout method, Back to Eden is basically just sheet mulching. But it wouldn't be much of a method if it didn't involve a few simple steps. First, lay out a thick layer of paper or cardboard. This helps to smother out any unwanted weeds. Next, lay down a few inches of natural compost to give your plants a bit of a head start. And finally, add a layer of wood chips on top. When it comes time to plant, just gently push aside the wood chips and plant like normal. Now, some will ask about nitrogen leaching as the wood slowly starts to break down, but from what we've read, that's only a problem if you actually till the wood chips into the compost and the soil underneath. But just remember, nature doesn't dig, it covers. So be like nature, and you'll be just fine. Okay, now that we've got all this background information out of the way, let's get building. First, we measured and marked the location of the new garden bed. We decided on 8 feet by 36 feet, or a little more than double the area of the other beds. We wanted extra room for veggies that prefer to be planted in a larger clump, like, say, corn. Next, we needed a paper layer, and for that we had just the thing. A huge collection of yard waste bags. Recycled, biodegradable, and incredibly cheap. Next, we headed back to our compost pile that just doesn't seem to quit and spread out cartload after cartload until we had an even layer about 3 to 4 inches thick. And then we were ready for the wood chips. Now, we have an entire forest full of trees and a near infinite amount of brush that could easily be turned into wood chips. But alas, we don't have a wood chipper. So, last fall, I began looking for a local source of preferably free wood chips, and within no time I found exactly that. So, I grabbed a buddy, borrowed a trailer, and got to work. I unloaded the wood chips the following day, and there they sat, all winter. So, once again, we spread out cartload after cartload until we had an even layer about 2 or 3 inches thick. The only real concern was just to make sure that we didn't accidentally rake any of the chips into the compost, but luckily this was pretty easy work, so we were done in no time. And there you have it, another 288 square feet of prime growing space all ready for planting in May. And if everything works out, we shouldn't have to water, weed, or till this garden ever. And we even had some wood chips left over, which is great because, don't forget, we still have one more empty space left in our layout. But that's a whole other video. So, we'll see you next time.